rail loading site to store all of the grain that might come off a field in 1 week. However, I will say that what we are seeing as a change in the industry is the grain shipping companies are building more and more storage at railhead on the basis that they, getting back to the whole fact, and Doug mentioned it and I mentioned it as well, I mean, grain originates in a truck. And the grain shipping companies are looking at it as a competitive way to attract that grain to their grain elevator if they have storage. So we're seeing actually more and more larger bins of storage built at the railhead for that very specific reason. I mean, obviously they can load a shuttle train more quickly and they can load more shuttle trains, but at the same time they're doing it for the purpose of attracting the grain from the farmer's field into their storage facility so that they have it on hand to sell. So that is something new that that we're seeing more so in the last 12 months than we've ever seen.
And I think that's consistent with what we heard, I think, a little bit earlier today and recently in some different venues, including the Grain Car Council yesterday, that happened to be in town meeting. Following that line of thought, are the railroads ready for what might be a different type of peak this year? There may not be a peak right now or in the fall. Could be a January peak that might be driven by tax planning reasons, international trade reasons, the increased access to warehousing storage. But I mean, should we be holding our breath and not taking Christmas holiday this year because you guys aren't going to be able to deliver come whenever the peak hits?
Yeah, as it pertains to grain, I mean, we are seeing significant volume right now. So we are feeling a peak right now, especially given the fact that I think there was a lot of feeling that with the drought conditions that were experienced in the in the Midwest, that there would be a lot less crop. But in fact, the qualities there and some of the crops that are there are resulting in a fairly dramatic demand. Frankly, if the peak if you were able to take the peak and spread it out a little bit, we'd be quite happy with that. And I think you've heard that consistently as well. That if you had volumes continue to move into January and February, that would be a good thing for us, frankly. So we are, in terms of car supply, locomotives, railway capacity, we're ready to continue to handle the volumes all the way through January, February.
I think as a system, from our perspective, we're probably better positioned right now to do anything than we have been probably for the last 12 months or so. But you have to tell me how big the peak is to tell you whether you need to be here on Christmas to answer the phone, because we're all guessing.
On the Canadian system, there was some reference to the cars being government-owned and being generally older and smaller. Tell me about the condition of the track. Are you incentivized or disincentivized to making investments you would like to make when you're constrained on your rate collections? I've heard reference in some briefings to some track not being able to handle the heaviest cars that are in use in some parts of the system in the western part of Canada. Is there any truth to that?
The only part of the revenue which is constrained in terms of a revenue cap is only the export grain business. All of the business that CNCD move are, don't have the same model. So when you talk about mainline track, there's a lot of different traffic that pays for the mainline upkeep. So that's not an issue. It's only when you get to branch line, who would only be having grain business. In some cases, it's on a short line. Then the density of traffic on that business, on that short line, on that branch line may be the cause why the tracks haven't been upgraded to 286, or it's not upgraded to 286 today because maybe the short lines haven't enough capital to do that. When you talk about fairly long distance to get to a few elevators as you get to the north, the issue of density becomes, what needing is reinvestment, the level of reinvestment. But on the main line, not an issue.
A legacy of some of the regulation in the Canadian grain system in the past had been some light loading grain branch lines. Over the last few years, most of those have been removed, and as JJ indicated, I don't think we have any grain branch line that would be less than 263,000 pound loading. I mean, there could be opportunities to go to 286, but again, it comes down to the economics, and that's, as one of the speakers earlier said, I think quite simply a density issue. Is there enough traffic coming off that line?
On a different topic, and I'm winding up, so don't bear with me. I want to sort of just hear a commitment to the common carrier obligation that we take so seriously here. We had testimony earlier today about markets being closed or shippers wanting to send product to the Gulf Coast, for example, and the railroad saying, no, that'll cost you, just hypothetically, $1 gazillion. We want you to send it to the West Coast. I just get concerned about who's calling the shots on ag policy, and ag is, should it be the railroad? Should it be the farmer and the shipper? Help me sort of understand what's going on out there and why, if you could.
The issue you raise, it's a complicated issue. I mean, for instance, sometimes what the shipper wants, we can't provide. I mean, if he wants to move it to a certain place and it's not economic for us to move it, or the return is so low that it's not investable, that's just a fact. And so if we quote a rate that's higher than is then economic for him to do the business, that's just kind of an irreconcilable difference. I mean, we're not in the business to subsidize their business. And just because a shipper wants to go to a certain place doesn't mean that it's an economic supply chain, And the grain business, the problem with the grain business is it's ever changing. And so you hear certain anecdotes where somebody says, well, the railroad wouldn't quote me a rate. Well, that's not true. I'll always quote them a rate, but it may not be the rate that they want. But, I'm sorry, I'm not in the business to subsidize their particular business. And we all know that when somebody invests in plant and equipment, when they invest, they're not given a lifetime guarantee that the particular location that they picked out for that particular asset is going to be a viable business for 1,000,000 years in the future. And so things change, and we can't be expected to basically engage in uneconomic behavior in order to perpetuate somebody else's poor business decision.
Just to add to Kevin's comments, I mean, the CN system in the U.S. is relatively narrow in scope from a destination perspective, going predominantly to the Gulf. We have actually worked with Kevin and his group for shippers in Iowa on our lines where his shuttle trains come into those origins and can go to the PNW or can go to the Texas markets and the California markets. So we've actually worked in the last year or so to expand the market opportunities for shippers in Iowa on the CN lines.
I mean, I think from our perspective, you heard me talk about the growth that we've seen in our traffic to the PNW, in particular with the Union Pacific. Like the CN, we actually don't serve a lot of destination markets either. We do serve some of the wheat milling markets in the Midwest, but a lot of the larger export markets we don't serve, so we rely on other carriers to work with us. From a common carrier perspective, we would actively work with any other carrier to provide a rail service and a rate that rate to the customer to get the product to destination. But again, we're not, for the most part, a single rail carrier in the U.S., and so we're very reliant on a number of intricacies in logistics. And I think Kevin's pointed those out very, very well in terms of the logistics of the overall business that come into play when you price.
And we take the common carrier obligation seriously, but as Kevin mentioned, if a customer wants to go to a market that it's uneconomic for us to get to, we'll quote them a rate, but it may not be what they're looking for.
In your mind, though, would it be reasonable under the circumstances?
In our minds, it would be reasonable, yes, relative to what the cost is for us to get it there.
You have to take into consideration cycle times. Like if you have some very small volume business, and I think Kevin, your explanation of the number of cars you have in place to move your shuttles versus your single car type business just demonstrates if you get a trip per month out of a car, your cost is going to be substantially higher than it would be if you had 3 trips per month out of a car.
Any questions from colleagues? No. Well, thank you. That concludes today's hearing. I do want to note that we will keep the record open as stated before until January 12th, 2007. We thank all the witnesses for your time today and look forward to working with all of you to try to improve the situation we heard about today. Thanks.